WOVU-LP, Cleveland.
This is Open Door with Vince Robinson. In-depth conversations with people who are making a difference in the lives of others here and around the world. Culture is at the heart of who you are. Know your culture, find yourself on Open Door with Vince Robinson.
Hello and welcome to Open Door. I'm Vince Robinson, and I have been joined by Mr. Peter Lawson Jones. He is a veteran of the stage, and he's also a veteran of the political stage. He served as a county commissioner here in Cuyahoga County for a number of years before he segued into the world of theater. And I'm imagining that you probably did some acting before you got into politics. But first of all, welcome to the show.
Vince, it's always a pleasure to be in your company and on one of your shows, so thank you for the invitation.
Yes, and I'll remind the listeners that you did appear on Open Door, the television version that we recorded at the time at Cable 9, which is now community-focused television. It was just a half hour long, and that half hour flew by so quickly. So now we have...
So we have to do part deux.
Part deux, yeah, and maybe 3 and 4.
Why not?
Yes, indeed.
I'm amenable.
Yes.
I'm open to Open Door.
Okay. All right. Well, so welcome back. Before we get into your acting career, and you've done some great things. I mean, I'm sitting here in front of a national television star right now, so I'm honored.
From your lips to God's ears.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that, but we spoke about politics a little bit earlier, so I just want to get your thoughts about the present state of politics here in Cleveland. We have a mayoral race in progress right now, and we're about to choose another congressperson with the departure of Congresswoman Fudge, who is now serving as a secretary in the Biden administration. What are your thoughts about the direction that Cleveland and Cuyahoga County have taken since you left the political world?
Well, I tell you, I think we are in dire need, you used the term earlier before we came on air, of a political reset. I don't think I'm alone in my assessment that the quality of leadership that's been evidenced on the state level, particularly in the General Assembly, on the county level, and on the municipal level, has been mediocre at best. And that's not to say that there aren't people who are holding office that I don't think are men and women of great integrity and that can be trusted as public officials. But we are in extraordinary need at this point of real vision, because Ohio has continued to fall down the ranks of the 50 states in all the dominant categories. That's been the case here in Cleveland. At best, we've tread water over the ensuing several decades. And notwithstanding all the hype, the performance of county government over the last decade or so has been subpar. I think we have not had the kind of leadership, and I'm hardly alone in thinking that many people who supported the reform of county government and the transition from the 3 county commissioner form to the county executive county council expected. And what have we seen? We've seen ineffective leadership emanating from the office of the county executive. And I say this, and I consider the current occupant a very close friend. But I think there has been universal disappointment in the performance of our county executive. The county council, as one could have predicted if anybody had studied county government structure, when you have the county executive, county council form of government, where you have an executive and a legislative body, it's always more bureaucratic. It always costs more, and that's exactly what we've seen since the transition from county commissioner form of government to county executive, county council. The problem with the previous form of county government was not its structure, but the problem was that we had several in leadership positions who were committing crimes, taking bribes, etc. But that wasn't the fault of the system or the structure. That was the fault of certain individual elected officials. And so you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but that's precisely what happened. You know, this interview is probably going to get me in a lot of trouble because I've said some rather unflattering things about people actually that I like, but we just have not seen the quality of leadership, innovative, creative, forceful, impactful, change-oriented, dynamic that we need to see in this community.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that it's possible to see the reset that you speak of?
Well, I'm a person of great faith. I'm an optimist by nature. I see the glass always as half full as opposed to half empty, so I certainly hope so. You know, I think that there are several candidates running for mayor who could do a good job and can move us forward. I think that some of the candidates that are beginning to surface for the county executive position, I think would be solid performers who have energy and have ideas. So I'm hopeful. But I tell you, when all is said and done, it's going to depend on the engagement, the level of engagement of the public that's going to be voting this new leadership into office. And if the public only relies on whose name they've heard the most or who has the glossiest flyers that they distribute or spending the most on commercials, we've got to get beyond that. We've got to do some very strong and deep assessments of each candidate and their capacity to break this morass that's engulfed us in Cuyahoga County, in the state, and on the local level.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that is an issue when you talk about people doing their homework and research on candidates is you have such a high rate of illiteracy. So when people come to the voting booth, if they do come, many times they come in and they just go based on names that they
Absolutely.
recognize, and they don't really have any familiarity with the candidate's position on certain
Well,
things.
the rate of political illiteracy is extraordinarily high. The lack of civic engagement, extraordinarily high. And many people are in survival mode. And so they aren't thinking beyond where the next meal is going to come from, where they're going to get the money to keep a roof over their head. So to them, the world of politics is something that they view as irrelevant to their lives, although it is absolutely critical and has a tremendous and very impactful on people's lives. So that's part of the problem. But then again, we need the kind of candidates who motivate and excite us, and not excite us in the way that Trump excites his followers, not with lies and empty promises and a lot of pyrotechnics and legerdemain and magical tricks. But we need somebody who has the who has the force of ideas and intellect and a real true compassion that connects with the voters. So I think I have hope that some of the candidates who are running in the elections over the next year and a half can do exactly that. Because when you have voter turnout that's at 10, 15, 20%, it's an indictment of the entire democratic process.
Mm-hmm. Particularly in primary elections, people will turn out every 4 years for the presidential elections, but then the elections in between, they don't get as much excitement.
Off, yes.
Right. And then you also have this movement towards voter suppression that is just raging across the country. The Republicans are very serious about suppressing the votes of certain Democratic voters in certain constituencies. So it seems as though it is important for folks to turn out, because if it wasn't, then they wouldn't go through such extreme measures.
Absolutely. There's no question that if there weren't a fear of high voter turnout, and particularly high voter turnout amongst those who have the most to gain by changing the current paradigm, the current political structure, you would not see these kind of nefarious machinations on the part largely of Republicans. But let me two things, I think. Number one, it's clear that what the Republicans are doing in many states and on the national level is absolutely vile. But on the other hand, we cannot allow ourselves to be discouraged by their efforts to suppress the vote. When you think about what our parents and grandparents, how they sacrificed to, one, win the right to vote, and they were indefatigable. They were not to be deterred when it came to exercising that right. They were going to show up at the polls. When we look at what happened in South Africa, when Mandela was on the ballot and people waited for days for the opportunity to vote, we need that same kind of energy. So no matter what kind of tricks and that people try to play, we don't fall prey to them, because there shouldn't be anything that takes away our energy when it comes to the plebiscite and to voting, to casting our ballot, to making our voice heard. Because that is the one place in which everybody is absolutely equal, at the voting booth.
Right. What we're seeing now also is a lot more younger people getting involved in politics and getting elected to office. You're seeing a lot more women getting elected to office. You're seeing kind of an infusion of Latino politicians as well. I'm curious about your thoughts about the notion of succession planning. You know, we've had figures like George Forbes and others who have a legacy that they've left in terms of politics. But I think one of the failures of those who came before us is that they didn't really have any plans for someone to succeed them that could carry the baton forward.
You know, part of the problem is that oftentimes people in elective office at a certain point begin to view that particular office as theirs, their possession. They're the owners of it. And as a consequence, and secondly, most of us don't understand or see our own mortality. So you have people who begin to perceive that office as their birthright, and they have no sense of their own mortality. So their feeling is that they're going to be there forever. And so, no, they don't make any real efforts to groom a new generation. And also, unfortunately, in our community, there's always been the thought that's a result of the legacy of racism and slavery and discrimination. There's always been this feeling that only one of us can win the prize. And so if you've got it, I've got to wrest it from you. And if I have it, I've got to hold on to it. And if you want it, you're going to have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps the same way I did. So this becomes a self-perpetuating cycle where there's an unwillingness on the part to groom others, to be mentors, and to engage proteges for the fear that they're going to come and try to wrest this precious metal that only you have from you. And one of them, and this was particularly the case before we've seen, African Americans, Latinos, and women beginning to expand their power beyond what were traditionally their power bases and their prospects in the past. So hopefully that will loosen things up as people say, oh, no, I can do more than just become the African-American councilman who represents a primarily African-American constituency.
Yes.
You know, I can be the governor. I can be the senator. I can be the president. I don't have to restrict myself.
Okay.
And hopefully the more that becomes a feeling, then the less individuals will have that sense that if they don't hold on to this one precious political office, that there's nothing else for them.
Okay.
So there's a complex mix and brew of psychological and other factors that have made it so we haven't done the kind of job that we should do in terms of preparing future generations to step up to leadership positions.
You're listening to Open Door. I'm Vince Robinson. My guest is Peter Lawson Jones, former politician, now actor, and we're going to talk less politics and more acting when we come back. This is 95.9 FM WOVU, a Burton Bell Car community radio station. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Sophie Absolutely.
I'm E-Rock Beats.
Welcome to The Circle,
where healing is building. And you're listening to WOVU 95.9 FM,
Burton Bell Car Community Radio.
We're back on Open Door with Vince Robinson and my guest, Peter Lawson Jones. You know, I've admired the name because it's one of those names that you don't forget. You know, the triple nomenclature has been very effective. It separates you from all of the other Peter Joneses.
And you know, I've met other Peter Joneses in my life, so it absolutely does. A couple of interesting facts. Number one, Lawson was my paternal grandfather's first name. His name was Lawson Jones. And so my parents gave me my paternal grandfather's first name as my middle name. And my oldest son has his paternal grandfather, and both maternal and paternal grandfather's name as his middle name. Both my wife's father and my father, first name was Charles. So hopefully we have a tradition, and so the next generation, when they have a son, Peter will be his middle name. But it's kind of interesting because early in my political career, I can remember this debate I was having with a close friend. He said, you know, really don't use Lawson. That makes you sound too patrician and elite. Just go with Peter Jones. And, you know, I gave some thought to his perspective. I said, no, I'll take my chances. I'm going to go with all 3 days. That's how I sign my checks. You know, perhaps I'm a bit anal like that, and I'd like to, you know, use all 3 days. But it did work out pretty well. And what's been fascinating is that oftentimes people will think my last name is Lawson or Lawson Jones as a result of just using the middle name in the normal course of business as I do.
Okay. In the last segment, we were talking about the paradigm shift from the old to the new, and I just was wondering if there's anybody on the political scene right now that excites you. You know, some of the up-and-comers.
Although I think his is a hard road to hoe for this particular election, he's running for mayor. I think Justin Bibb has a tremendous amount of promise. There was a gentleman who was on the South Euclid City Council, but he has kind of taken a step back from politics. You know, I think that I hear good things about Juanita Brent, a state representative. I hear, I know that Terrence Upchurch, who's a state representative on the east side, I think he has potential. Mike Bowen is somebody who can be the next Arnold Pinckney behind the scenes. So these are some of the individuals that, you know, I know of and have worked with, and some are proteges to various extent that we'll meet from time to time and talk about the lay of the land, and I'll give them what advice I can. You know, Janine Boyd, a young, youthful state representative. We'll have to see what the future holds for some of the individuals who are in their late 20s and 30s and 40s. Certainly, Chantel Brown has done well. I don't know how this congressional race will work out for her, but she certainly has a future. And so, yeah, I'm always keeping my eye out for the what's interesting is one of the people in the congressional race, I look forward to meeting him, but apparently he refers to himself as a kind of public policy wonk or nerd, is this Tariq Shabazz. So he's been apparently impressing a number of people, and I look forward to making his acquaintance and seeing firsthand what some of the excitement about his future is.
Mm-hmm. If my memory serves me correctly, didn't you spend some time in Columbus?
I was a state representative for about 2.5 terms before I was appointed a county commissioner.
Okay. So just looking at the impact of the State House on public policy and being mindful of two bills currently proposed by the House that involve critical race theory and a ban of it. One is kind of local. Chester Lynn is the representative. I think her name is Grindell.
Diane Grindell. I served with Diane and with her husband.
Okay.
Yeah, she succeeded her husband in the General Assembly when I was there. This is the problem with state politics right now. When I was a state representative, Democrats were in the minority. However, the leadership in the House, the Republican leadership in the House, was moderate. There were 10, 11, 12 members of the Ohio House of Representatives who were referred to as the Caveman Caucus because their views were so ultra-conservative. But they did not control the levers of power in the General Assembly. The moderate Republicans did. And oftentimes moderate Republicans and progressive moderate Democrats or pragmatic Democrats really were driving the public policy in the state. That's no longer the case. The inmates have taken over the asylum, so to speak. And that's one reason you see all of the draconian measures that are being proposed in the Ohio General Assembly at this point on a whole raft of issues, from reproductive freedom to race-based issues to issues relative to vaccinations. I mean, just a very, very sharp right orientation that was not flourishing even 20 years ago.
Well, you know, what's troubling is that you have all these things in progress or in effect, and at the same time, that survival mentality that you talked about earlier also being in effect, and the fact that people are really kind of detached in a general sense from what's going on in the State House. So those bills get passed, and there's no opposition or no resistance, and then the landscape changes.
Well, here's the thing. In the old days, if you were a threat to a city councilman in the city of Cleveland, they'd encourage you to run for the state legislature. So quite frequently, the top elected officials were on Cleveland City Council. I'm talking about during the era of the Charlie Carrs and George Forbes and Leo Jacksons and Edmund Turks and Anthony Garofoli. Many were lawyers, successful businessmen. You had a different quality on the Cleveland City Council than arguably you do today. So, but in those days in the legislature, the people running for the legislature were those who were less adept politicians, and this were landing place for people who couldn't get elected to Cleveland City Council or to mayors in some of the suburbs. So, to a large extent, because state government operates out of Columbus, if you aren't in Columbus, if you're outside of I-70, I-270, you aren't paying much attention to what's going on there. The other thing is the forces that are in power at this juncture in Ohio history are those who hail from small towns, farm areas, exurban areas, and they're running the show. And so Democrats don't have a lot of input. If you're from an urban area, you don't have a lot of influence and power at this stage. And only through redistricting, fair redistricting, will that formula change.
Mm-hmm. And the redistricting that's currently underway seems to be favoring Republicans.
It does in most states in the nation. And even though we tweaked the redistricting formulas and process through a statewide referendum a couple of years ago, still, even with those revisions and those modifications, the Republicans will control the drawing of lines on both the congressional and the state legislative levels.
Okay. with all the knowledge that you have of process and what's going on in Columbus and locally, do you think that there's ever a possibility that you might decide to re-enter the political world?
It's highly unlikely, Vince. I've had opportunities in this current congressional race. I had people talk to me and were encouraging me and urging me to run. I enjoy what I'm doing now. I have a nice balance between practicing law. I have a nice consulting practice in community engagement. At this juncture, I'm working on 2 contracts with the city of Cleveland. I just finished a contract with our Metropolitan Planning Organization. I'm part of a team going after a contract in the city of Shaker Heights, in which we have a fairly decent shot, I think, of getting that. And then the acting, I'm always busy either auditioning or performing in one thing or the other. I'm working on writing my 3rd play. My 2nd play has had 2 successful productions at Ensemble Theater in Cleveland Heights and is scheduled for productions, full stagings at Ryan Repertory Company in Brooklyn, at the King Arts Center in Columbus, and theatrical group, the Berkeley Black Repertory Group, is interested in producing the play out in Berkeley, California, in the Bay Area. So I'm enjoying what I'm doing. Congress, for example, is a pretty dysfunctional body right now. Why at the age of, I'm 68 now, why would I want to do that with the remaining years? You know, I read something the other day where it said that it is possible for a human being to live to 150. Well, I doubt that I'm going to make it that far. And I think it's reasonable to assume that I have more years behind me than ahead of me. And it's just not how I care to spend my time, especially in Congress, living between D.C. and Cleveland. And then when you get home, you've got 1,000 events to go to and fundraising to do, and you're running every 2 years. And you're always, responding to the media each and every day on a bevy of issues, some of which you might care about, others of which you don't, but you still are supposed to have an opinion. I tell people, and this is, I say it kind of tongue-in-cheek, but being out of politics, I no longer have to go places. I don't want to go speak to people I don't care to speak to or be nice to people I detest. Mm-hmm. And that's a certain form of freedom. What I do miss about politics, however, are 2 things. Number 1, having a voice that matters on the matters of the day. I always enjoyed wading into the fray, and, sharing my worldview and trying to effectuate that. And I miss being able to pick up a phone or author a piece of legislation or sign a letter that makes some deserving person's life better. That was the real joy. And I do miss being able to help out people in oftentimes a massive way, whether it was through the creation of the fatherhood programs on the state or local level, or being the public face behind the movement to establish Cuyahoga arts and culture, or establishing economic development programs, or helping somebody who had a blemish on their record get a job. I know that there's one guy helped get a job who had a criminal record. He's now a supervisor. And I feel great about those kind of things. So I do miss that about politics. But there's so much that you have to endure and put up with. And the older you get, the less patience you have for that which really isn't important.
I would say that you still have a voice, you're still using it, and you have mechanisms that will enable you to empower your voice in the writing and the acting. So we're going to talk about that when we come back. Okay. You're listening to Open Door on 95.9 FM WOVU. I'm Vince Robinson, having a conversation with former county commissioner and state representative Peter Lawson Jones. We're going to talk about Chicago Fire when we come back. We'll be back right after this.
WOVU listeners, did you know you can call us during any live show? Did you know you can ask questions or give your comments live on the air? If you didn't know, now you know. Call the WOVU request line at 216-271-0959. Your voice is our request. No one says it like you. You're better than the rest. Call us 216-271-0959. Questions, comments, complaints. We want all that and the kitchen sink. This is WOVU. Our voices united. We can't do it without you. Call on through.
You're listening to Open Door with Vince Robinson on 95.9 FM WOVU. My guest is Peter Lawson Jones. In the previous two segments, we talked politics, but now we're going to shift. We talked about your voice. You indicated that you have written plays, and there are some plays that are going to be performed in certain venues. Talk about your life as a creative, someone who was involved in culture. And I did take note of the fact that you talked about Cuyahoga Arts and Culture and your role in that. So we'll talk about that.
That's something I was very proud of,
yes.
Having been one of the public face of the campaign that established Cuyahoga Arts and Culture, and the things that I did as a county commissioner to establish that particular entity. It's interesting. I didn't act in elementary school or junior high or high school. I didn't act until I went to college, and my roommate, one of my roommates, was in a play. They were doing Douglas Turner Ward's famous satire, A Day of Absence. And so he asked me, he said, it was a Sunday afternoon. He said, "Hey, Peter, you doing anything this evening?" I said, "No, nothing important." He said, "Well, why don't you come over to our rehearsal?" I said, "Well, sure, why not?" So I went over there, and they hadn't cast all the roles, so I offered to help the director out by simply reading a few of the roles. And at the end of the rehearsal, he turned to me and said, "Hey, would you like to assume those roles for the actual play?" And I thought of maybe a millisecond or two, and I said, "Sure, okay." That's how I got into acting. I returned to acting almost in a similar, very serendipitous way, a way of a kind of a kismet-like way. My first play was called The Family Line. I wrote it when I was in college. It's been performed at first at Harvard, then at Ohio University. It had some stage readings. And I was on the board at Karamu, and at that time they had the Joyce Whitley Annual Stage Reading Festival. And so I said to the executive director at the time, Jerry McClammy, I've written this play. Would you consider putting it up, during the stage reading festival? And she read it and said, "Sure, let's do it." And so when the play was successful enough that they then had an actual full production of it. And so I used to come to watch the play every night. I always tell people the two plays I've written and the third I'm working on are like my fourth, fifth, and sixth children. And I became friends with Terrence Spivey, who was then the artistic director, because Terrence would be there either rehearsing a show or leaving the office, and he would see me, and we would talk, and he soon found out that I knew a little bit of something about theater, especially things about black theater, and that I used to act. So he offered me an opportunity to read the stage directions at a collaboration at Cleveland Playhouse. They had a kind of stage reading festival, and this particular play, Ruby Dee and Bill Cobb were performing in it. And so when he told me I'd get a chance to be on the same stage with them, and all I had to do was read stage directions, I said, "Sure, I'll do that." And then after that, he came to me and said, "Well, there's a play I'd like to put up at some point, and we're going to do a stage reading of it. I wonder if you'd like to read the lead." So I said, "Yeah, that would be fun." And stage readings are easy. You don't have to memorize anything. There's not extensive rehearsals. There's no props. It's a pretty simple affair. And after that, I realized after 28 years, the bug I thought that I had squelched, that I had extinguished, had returned. And then I auditioned for a play, and then one thing led to another. Plays led to some opportunities in TV and movies. I began to secure theatrical agents, both in Cleveland and several cities outside. I didn't anticipate, if you had told me 15 years ago that a substantial part of my post-political career would be devoted to acting and theater and TV and film, I would have bet you dollars to donuts that wasn't going to happen. And at this stage, I've been fortunate enough to have been either on the set or with speaking roles on the set or on stage with Cicely Tyson and Tyler Perry and Michael Imperioli of The Sopranos, Matthew McConaughey, Bruce Dern and I did on-camera improv when we were working on a scene for White Boy Rick. Iman Walker, who came to most people's attention when he was in Oz and is now plays the chief on Chicago Fire. Although the scene was cut from the final product, I did a scene with Daniel Kaluuya in Judas and the Black Messiah. So I would have had, I couldn't have imagined that this is where life would lead.
You absolutely didn't imagine that when you were participating in Day of Absence.
Certainly not then.
and how ironic, to be a part of a production like that, which I was able to witness at Karamu.
Karamu did it 3 or 4 years ago.
Matter of fact, I really liked that play because I photographed it, and the photograph that I took ended up in the Friday magazine.
Okay, good. Okay.
So
you have an attachment.
Oh, absolutely.
To Day of Absence.
Absolutely.
And it was one of the most popular satires in the late 60s, early 70s. I did the play in 1971 at Harvard College when I was a freshman.
I shouldn't let this out the bag, but I was having a conversation with our good friend Stephen Boyd about that play, and I imagined telling that story from a different angle, but I'm not going to tell you. I can't. I'll tell you off camera.
Okay.
I can't tell you right now, but it's a great idea. When the idea came up, we just laughed.
One of those kinds of ideas.
One of them belly laughs. I was just thinking of a new version of Day of Absence.
Okay. I look forward to hearing this.
Yeah, so I'll tell you about it. But, one of the things that has always fascinated me about acting, particularly theatrical acting, is an ability to memorize all of those lines. I mean, especially now that we're the age that we are and our memories don't work as well as they used to. Is that a great challenge for you?
That's a wonderful question. And I have certain process that I use to memorize lines that I've developed. And I do think it's the most, to me, the most challenging part of acting, particularly theatrical acting, where you don't get a second take. Once it leaves your mouth, it's there for the audience to absorb. And there have been occasions where most actors, myself included, have gone up, where for a moment you couldn't remember the line. And you somehow had to find your way back, even if you had to improv, and have that improv consistent with the play until you could find your way back to where you needed to be. I've been in situations where characters were supposed to enter with me on the stage, and they were nowhere to be found, and I had to quickly adjust the dialogue so that person's absence would not be noted. I remember one time it was a 4-person play, and we were doing it at Cleveland Playhouse in their old black box theater on Carnegie, and one of the actresses lost her way, and the three of us tried to get her back on track, but she was totally resistant. She had no idea how far afield she was, and we probably lost 2 or 3 pages in the script. So these things happen, and yes, it's an actor's greatest nightmare, going up. And I've heard stories about people who've gone up in a 1-person show, and they actually had to leave the stage, get themselves together, reacclimate, and come back out and finish the show. So yeah, that's a great challenge. But the one thing I like is that because I'm always auditioning and therefore always memorizing more lines, and sometimes you only have a couple of days to do it, and it's not like that's the only thing I'm doing with my life where I can just spend 8 hours memorizing a couple of pages of dialogue. But I really think that calisthenic of memorization will help stave off dementia, Alzheimer's, typical and traditional memory loss. So I just like, I exercise physically every day. That calisthenic, that exercise, that memory regimen, that memorization regimen is going to be helpful for me now at the age of 68, and I think will be as long as I continue to perform.
Yes.
And, people ask me who are my role models, and some of them are simply the men and women who in their 80s and 90s continue to act. We lost locally one extraordinary actress, Dorothy Silver, who was performing well into her 90s. I saw her at the Cleveland Playhouse a couple of years ago in The Crucible, and at the end of the play, this woman who was then in her late 80s had to ascend probably 20 to 30 stairs. So when I think of her and I think of Eli Wallach, who was performing in his 90s, and Christopher Plummer and Anthony Hopkins, who were Academy Award winners in their 80s, they're my inspiration.
Mm-hmm. And then there are actors like Bill Cobb, who got a late start in acting in their life.
I'm so glad you mentioned him. Absolutely. A friend and a role model, clearly a role model for all of us, who started later and is still finishing strong, still working.
He's still acting.
Still working.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I know Neil Hodges spends a lot of time with him.
Yeah.
So it's great to see him always. I know he's been involved in the Greater Cleveland Urban Film Festival a few times. Mm-hmm. So it's
I've had a couple of movies, short films and others that I was in that have played at the Greater Cleveland Urban Film Festival. I think that's been a wonderful addition to our entertainment itinerary, and particularly for African American writers, directors, performers, to be able to have that kind of showcase, and to particularly showcase a lot of local talent in many of the short films and feature films that are shown during the festival.
Okay, we got just a few moments before we go to break. Tell us about your experience with the television show Chicago Fire.
Tremendous. I was in Chicago for about 10 or 11 days. It was a wonderful payday. But the experience itself, and we were shooting at a rather interesting time because it was before any vaccinations, so there were certain precautions that were taken relative to making sure that nobody came down with COVID. So during those 10 or 11 days I was in Chicago, I was probably on set to perform 3 of those days. The 4th day, I had to go in the studio for hair and makeup. But 8 of those days, I had to report to be tested for COVID. And the way the craft services, the way the food was served, very different. The precautions taken on the set, generally in between takes, the actors went to kind of their own areas, kind of isolated. You didn't take your mask off until it was time to say your lines. So it was a phenomenal. It was a very interesting experience to be involved in a major production. And the reason they take these precautions is because if they have to go down for a day, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars that they lose. But the experience itself of working with Matt Earl Beasley, the director, wonderful director, and my primary scene partner was Iman Walker, who many people don't know is British. And you wouldn't know until after you, in between takes, his accent, he freely displays his accent. But there's one thing, and I don't know if we have time before the break, one story I want to tell.
We should take a pause.
Let's take a break, and then I've got a good story about the creative process between actors on a set and how different things come about spontaneously and extemporaneously.
We're going to talk creative process when we come back. You're listening to Open Door with Vince Robinson on 95.9 FM WOVU. I'm with Peter Lawson Jones. Back in a moment.
Are you or someone you know in need of help? Here's a resource you can turn to.
The Thea Bowman Center has been serving the community for over 50 years and provides services to help support Mount Pleasant and surrounding communities of all ages. Some of these programs include adult education like GED, computer classes, food pantry, senior outreach, youth after school, and summer programs, and much more. Are you a Cleveland resident in need of a GED preparation, a food pantry, youth or senior programs? Then call the Thea Bowman Center at 216-491-0669 or visit theabowmancenter.org. Call the Thea Bowman Center at 216-491-0669 or visit theabowmancenter.org to register today.
This message is brought to you by the Thea Bowman Center and WOVU 95.9 FM, Our Voices United, a Burton Bell Carr community radio station.
Hi, this is Deborah Dahlman from the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland, and you're listening to WOVU 95.9 FM.
We're rounding third and headed home. Last segment of Open Door with Vince Robinson and my guest, Peter Lawson Jones. Creative process. Take us through it.
The first thing I'd like to say about Iman Walker is that just a very supportive actor. We were shooting the final scene, which was a very emotional scene in that particular episode. And in between takes, he says to me, he says, fantastic, you're doing a wonderful job. And I laughed. I said, well, even though my character is central to the episode, I only have like 50 words the whole episode. He said, oh, no. He said, but you're telling the story with your face. And he said, and you have a good face. He said, I've been around actors a long time. You have a great face. So just a wonderfully, supportive scene partner. So at the end of this particular episode, I'm sitting on the front stoop of this house that I used to occupy earlier in my life, and I'm suffering from dementia. And I get up from the stoop. He and I are conversing, and I give him I'm a retired police officer, and I give him my Fraternal Order Police cap, which means a lot to me. And I give it to him to remember both me and his father, who was a police officer. It's a very touching scene. And after we finished the one take, Iman said to me, he said, when you stand up, you ought to maybe look back at this house where you used to live, which was the house you purchased for your wife, your first house where the two of you lived together, and kind of give it one final look. And then give me the hat. I said, I like that. That's pretty interesting. I said, let me think about that. So it's about 30 degrees outside where we're shooting this outdoor scene, and he heads back to the van, the heated van in which he was being accommodated in between takes, and I go back to the van where I'm being accommodated. I think about it, and I come back and I say to him, and I said, I'm going to do what you say. I'm going to look back at that house, but I'm going to wait until the virtually end of the scene where we're exiting from the gate. And just before I get to the gate, to the house, then I'll look back. My thinking was this. My giving him the hat was a memorable moment, a connection between the two of us. And I didn't want to muddy that. I didn't want to make that at all murky or soft or squishy. I wanted that moment to live and breathe without any interference from anything else. Let people soak in that moment. And then, so you give them that moment, and then when I get he and I walk to the gate, and then I turn around and look back and kind of take a deep sigh. That gives the audience another moment to remember. That wasn't scripted. That came about with two committed actors who understand the dramatic process and come up with a moment that was as powerful as any in that episode, not written in by the, not penned by the writers, but created spontaneously in the moment with two actors who were just really living in the moment. So that was, I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that. And that collaboration, the connection that we had.
Well, the way you just described that, it reminds me so much of your friend Terrence Spivey. Because I've watched him in action, directing, and every movement has meaning.
Yes.
And sometimes it's not about what you say, it's about how you say it. When you're acting sometimes and you're on stage and somebody else is delivering their lines, you're acting at the same time.
Better be. If I'm not reacting to what they're doing, then the scene's going to fall flat. If I seem disengaged, the audience will pick up on that. And their focus will be pulled away from that moment, and they'll be saying, well, he doesn't really seem to be into this, or maybe what she's saying is really not that important. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. No, it's like in basketball, moving without the ball. The best players, Steph Curry, masterful at moving without the ball. We all admire his shooting and his handle, but what he does arguably better than any other player is he knows how to find the spots where he can receive the ball and take a shot. Moving without the ball, that's the equivalent of acting, reacting when it's not your turn to speak, but staying connected to the person who is speaking at that time, mm-hmm. and reacting to what they're doing or saying.
Yeah, and it's also, we talked about memorizing lines earlier, it's also necessary for you to memorize their lines as well.
One of the things that I do, anytime I get a script, I take 3 highlighters out. They're in different colors. In yellow, I highlight my lines. In orange, I highlight my actions. He stands up. He runs. He yells. And then in blue, I highlight the cue line that leads into my dialogue. But the other thing, so that's a technical thing. But the other thing is, the reason you want to listen to your playmates on stage, to your co-actors, the reason you want to do that is because generally what they are saying is leading to your bit of dialogue. And what they're saying is going to give some power and some a force to what you're saying, and gives a reason for it, and gives you a reason to say it a certain way. So, acting is more, in some respects, it's a very simple process, but in others, quite complex. Because it's more than just uttering lines with great, great mezzo forte, with great power. It is about creating with your scene partners a certain atmosphere that pulls the audience in. I remember one of the first plays I did. I think this time I was either a freshman or a sophomore. I was a sophomore at Harvard. And we were doing Ceremonies in Dark Old Men, which I came back to and did years later, playing the lead at Karamu. So I was playing the best friend of the lead, and I can just remember the final scene of that play. The audience was so quiet. I was thinking, my God, you could hear a pin drop. They are completely invested in what we're doing. They're captivated. They're mesmerized. And that was a function of a well-written piece, well-acted, and well-directed. So.
Okay. You also did a film, White Boy Rick. Tell us about your experience with that film.
Well, the most fun, the scene I was in on film, in the final film, lasts all of about a minute or two. But that was 6 hours of work to get it just right, shot from different angles, breaking it down into beats and different segments. But what's my major takeaway and what I most appreciated about that experience was the opportunity to talk with a Matthew McConaughey and to see how down to earth he was. I remember I said something to him that made him laugh and said, "All right." And I'm thinking, I got that iconic line from Matthew. I wanted to turn around and say, "Did you hear? He just hit me with an all right." Talking with Jennifer Jason Leigh at the table read, which is when the actor, not all the actors, but a number of actors are brought together. And it's the first time that the actors, the writers, the producer, the director are all there, and you just read through the piece. And this was even before I was cast. I was invited to participate in this table read. And so talking with Jennifer Jason Leigh, who got an Academy Award nomination for The Hateful Eight. And I was asking her, I said, because she sang in that and played the guitar. And I said, "Well, had you ever sung before in a movie?" She said, "No." She said, "Yes, but what I had never done was play the guitar." And she then told me how she learned how to play the guitar simply for this scene. Talking with Ryan Tyree Henry, who's in Atlanta and plays Paperboy in Atlanta. And he sat down kind of next to me, and at first I just kind of gave him a quick look, and he looked like a friend of mine, and I didn't even know acted. But then we stood up at the same time, and I realized it was, Brian Tyree Henry from Atlanta, and I just like hugged him like I knew him. I said, "Paperboy." And then he and I chatted, and I said, "Hey, this is my youngest son. My youngest son and I watch Atlanta all the time. Would you mind if I called him, just saying hi to him?" And he did. And then later he gave him an autograph. So the White Boy Rick experience was memorable because of those moments with extraordinarily gifted performers, Emmy Award, Tony Award nominated, Academy Award nominated, Academy Award winners like Matthew McConaughey, and just kicking it with them. Michael Imperioli of The Sopranos, when I was on Detroit 187, the TV show, same kind of guy. He was reading a book when I went into the area where a cast was to sit, and I wasn't going to disturb him. He put down his book and engaged me in conversation for the next 20 or 30 minutes. And Cicely Tyson on the set for Alex Cross, she and I chatted in between takes for about 30 minutes. That's been one of the things I've most enjoyed about my acting journey, is getting to know some of these legends, absolute legends, and just having a normal conversation. Daniel Kaluuya, he was in a quandary saying, people are saying to me that I shouldn't take some of the roles I've taken lately in Queen and Slim and Judas and the Black Messiah, that I'm going to get, as a consequence, kind of pigeonholed and typecast. And look, it yielded him an Oscar. But he and I were having this conversation. I'm saying, "Hey, look, you're making the right choices. It's going to work out. They'll see your talent. It's going to speak for itself. And if you feel strongly about these roles, that because of the statements the films are making, you have to continue to do that. Be true to yourself."
Okay.
So having these kinds of conversations with extraordinary, remarkable human beings has been something that I wouldn't have imagined.
Okay. We have just a few moments left. What's next for Peter Lawson Jones?
Well, I'd like to complete the play that I'm working on now, which is very different in many respects from my two previous plays. I certainly look for, I like to think that my work in Chicago Fire, and I'm in a national Marathon Oil commercial, that this is laying the groundwork for even to ascend the acting ladder further. It's an interesting thing. Acting is much harder to me than politics, the acting industry and profession. I felt I had control over the results in my political campaigns. I felt if I did X, Y, and Z, I was going to win. And 9 out of 10 times I was right. In acting, I can turn in an absolutely brilliant audition, but it doesn't mean I'm going to get the role. I have much less control over it. But I'm looking forward to my next opportunities in TV and film and on the stage. Looking forward to continuing to write. Maybe, as you said, just continue to wield a little political influence behind the scenes and supporting those candidates who can make a difference in our community.
Well, I have to commend you on your success both politically and in the entertainment realm, and I want to encourage you to continue, because whatever you touch, it is excellence. Peter Lawson Jones, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for joining us on Open Door.
Well, Vince, as I said, it's the honor and privilege and pleasure is always mine. Whenever I'm in the room with you, I'm going to learn something new, and I'm going to have some extraordinarily valuable conversation.
Well, trust, I'm taking notes. Thanks for joining us. Know yourself, love yourself, be yourself. Make today your best day. Peace.